Hello, everybody. Thank you and welcome to this session on, what's the topic? Building live virtual stages for broadcast and live production. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And virtual production and extended reality is definitely the talk of the town today. I think that's apparent also by the amount of stages that we see here around us and the stage that we're standing in. As novel as this field or discipline is and the techniques that we're applying, many of the technologies and workflows that we see being used have a really long history and a track record from the live events and broadcast industries. So today we'll be looking both backwards in time and forwards in time and discuss where virtual production is coming from, where it stems from, where it is headed, and also how it will affect live events as they start coming back. Hopefully that will be an informative and engaging discussion, and we will end our session here with opening up for questions from the audience, and would really love your input and feedback on what these guys have been discussing. So before we get started, I'm just going to do a quick intro of myself. My name is Marcus Bengtsson, and whoever can pronounce my last name correctly, I'll buy you a beer. I have a background in computer science, but I've slipped on a couple of banana peels and ended up here by doing sales and marketing and product development and all kinds of stuff. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm not originally from the US. I'm from Sweden, but I now live in LA, where I work as the head of technical solutions for Disguise. And I'm also the resident IKEA furniture assembly expert. So with that out of the way, I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists here. We have a group of some very talented and very seasoned and experienced people who have very strong ties to the live events industry, theater, Broadway, film and TV, and broadcast industries. So in no particular order, even though he's closest to me, I'm going to start with Brian. Brian Gaffney from Unity Technologies is a seasoned workflow specialist working alongside media and entertainment companies over the last 25 years, including Technicolor. Is it PIX Systems or PIX? PIX Systems, Codex, TurboSquid, and Autodesk in support of visual effects, games development, content management, and real-time 3D virtual production. Brian is a creative technologist who assists artists and engineers in realizing their creative visions and currently works at Unity 3D with a professional artistry team. Also from Unity, on the other end there, we have Ron Martin, who is the creative and technical director for the solutions team, focusing on real-time entertainment content and pipelines. Over the past 3 decades, Ron has developed hardware and software for mobile applications, film and television VFX production, video games, architectural visualization, virtual production, and higher education. Joining us from Silver Spoon is Matthew Haustel. He is responsible for designing video systems and guiding the team on new technology and workflows, having over 10 years of experience designing video systems and programming media servers for theater and live events. Matthew brings with him a passion for new technology and creative problem solving to the world of virtual production. Then we have Michael Kohler with the most amazing t-shirt. It's a bit desaturated. Is there anything we can do about that? Michael Kohler is a creative technologist currently focused on building the next generation of infrastructure and workflows to enhance live events, retail experiences, and virtual production. As a media server programmer, he traveled across the country working on various theater, television, and corporate productions, and in his free time enjoys building things and playing video games with his cat, Lena. And I have a feeling I know where that cat is named by. Yes. Current projects include working with virtual, augmented, hybrid, and extended realities at Fuse Technical Group, who are kindly hosting us here, and seeing how these realities can be used, abused, and distorted to fit into the live production workflow. Last, but definitely not least, we have Jay Spriggs, who is not only a dear friend of mine and a fellow fan of Paso Robles wines, he is also a technologist who has designed and implemented some of the earliest and most advanced virtual production stages. A thought leader in a variety of production disciplines, he creates comprehensive and sustainable technology solutions for clients like XR Stage, Sweetwater, Monolith, Intrepid Studios, PRG, ETC, Salesforce, Beyoncé, John Legend, and the list goes on and on and on. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me here today. I'm thinking this will be an exciting 45 minutes. So unless any of you have anything to confirm or deny of what I just said, I'm going to get started with some questions. So I'm sure many of you out there you're curious about what virtual production actually means. So why don't we start there? And this is a question for all of you. What is virtual production?
Okay, tough one.
Check. Hi. I believe that virtual production is from the moment that you start using a computer to create the content that's in your head. The virtual production process, as we've been talking about throughout the show, has been married between a camera and an LED wall. But each one of us, in our description of our jobs, use this word creative. And I think when we start thinking creatively and taking that bridge and that first step towards using a computer to visualize our ideas, we are in the throes of virtual production before we even start thinking about cameras and LED walls.
Anything to add, Jay?
Yeah, and I'll tack on to that, where we've been doing virtual production for quite a long time. We just started naming it because it grew so large that we kind of had to encapsulate it. As you said, LED and camera interrelation is one of the simplest things we can do with it, but looking forward into how we can use these different workflows to advance, as you said, creativity and artistry, that's the really exciting part.
Well, thank you. Brian, anything to add?
I would just say that, to add to that, we had been doing this for some long time, but COVID really sort of forced this term virtual production into our vernacular. But I think if we step back, as Ron said, it's really the creative vision that you can realize, the ability to get it up and allow from pre-visualization to final visual effects, the ability for everyone to come together to see things is another value add to virtual production. So I think it's just the evolution of what we've been doing for 20 to 30 years, combining green screen and visual effects in a real-time game engine now that really provides the differentiation of what virtual production was in broadcast graphics 20 years ago to what it is today.
Yeah, I completely agree there. And if we go back in time a little bit, or Michael, did you have something to add? No? Okay, got it. If we go back in time to March of 2020, when we all heard about this coronavirus for the first time, even though virtual production at that point existed as a term, it wasn't really defined what it was, and we can argue that it still isn't properly defined what it is. But if you look at the technology that existed back in 2020, compare that to the technology and the technologies and the techniques and workflows that exist today, what do you consider being the greatest advancement in technology and techniques in the past 2 years?
I think for me, sort of the greatest advancement in the technologies for all this stuff is maybe a little bit less about the actual technologies and more about how everybody has been coming together to develop the workflows that are being used to create this kind of production. I think we all sort of started in different places, but have been able to converge upon workflows that create actual value and good content and clever creative things. And that's not a process. It's not like, oh, congratulations, we're done, we've made it, virtual production is finished. It's more about the process of, okay, so what do we want to work on now? What do we want to focus on now? What can be improved? What worked? What didn't work? And the way everyone as an industry has come together, both from a more traditional film and television types of people, as well as, sort of our weird ragtag group of live event and production people, all kind of being able to mix and match different technologies from all these different industries and create something, better and new from those pieces has been really exciting to be a part of.
Try this one. To expand on that a little bit, I think from a technology perspective, like the software and the hardware have all caught up with, we were all pulling together tools and hacking together systems based on existing technology to make this work, and then all of the manufacturers, they kind of caught up and saw with feedback from the community, which I think was a huge part of it, that community feedback to develop the software and actually streamline it and create products that are actually designed for these workflows, really simplifying and improving the process. So we're all not kind of guessing and figuring it out. There are tool sets that we can build those workflows off of.
Yeah, and it just feels like we're not stapling it together anymore. I mean, shout out to Mark Pedersen over there. He's the one that owns XR Studio. We built that in June of 2020 because we just had to get back to work. So in many ways, we just had to do something, but we didn't have as defined of an end goal as we would normally have. Like, we didn't have a guarantee that what we were doing was going to succeed. And now we finally have the processes, we have the community, we have the understanding where we can actually start breathing and making it better instead of just trying to hit that production date.
Again, when we listen to everyone that's speaking here, we are literally looking at an industry in its renaissance. We've all come together in this opportunity, both collaboratively and as, challengers, to push each other to make things come together. Different companies that have never worked in alignment are now calling each other partners. I think it's a very exciting time. This is a new NAB. This is a new broadcast methodology, not only for anything that's live, but also what we're going to do with that experience, how we're going to take the technology that we've accelerated. I mean, it's so crazy. Like, when was the last time you heard somebody say, hey, point the camera at the TV? Things are changing so rapidly. And the technology alone and understanding what happens to color and every piece of this puzzle is so important to create a system that functions in the most dramatic and the most powerful means. Now we just have to figure out where to best use it and where economically that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I think it's also the great thing is it's become more accessible because these tools are streamlined. They're easier to use. You don't need those group of people, not to put us all out of work, but you don't necessarily need those group of people who can think outside the box and can figure out how to make these things work. You have software solutions that do your camera calibration for you, from lens to color to tracking, that didn't exist 2 years ago, that you had to home roll it, you had to figure it out yourself. And that's really opening the market up so that everyone can use it, and also gives an opportunity for everyone to learn how to use it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now is the education of what these tools are used for. And now that it's more accessible, more easy to understand, that education becomes easier for the rest of us to really show everyone how to use it and why to use it.
Thank you. I'd like to just agree with Matt there on education and the importance of education. Today, there's a lot of smart people out there, and there's a lot of cool technologies and techniques that we're exploring. But the biggest bottleneck that we still have is really talent and availability of talent. I know Jay Voluminous is focusing heavily on education. You talk a little bit about your initiatives there and how you see that happening.
Thank you for the softball there, Marcus. Yes, I would love to talk about our new company. But in reality, we're we're heading to this place where there's so much to learn and so exciting, but because we're crossing over all of these different production disciplines, there's so much that we actually have to ingest. I've learned more about color in the last 2 years than I ever thought I would. I used to just say, hey, the LED's on, it's bright, red kind of looks like red, but like, it's bright, that's cool. But I had to learn now about how, for instance, film utilizes color versus a broadcast camera. I've had to teach what's a gen lock. What is a gen lock, guys? Can we see a show of hands? Who knows what gen lock is here? A lot of people don't, and it's a big problem because it's actually very simple. These are rules, right? A lot of the engineering problems that we have are just based on people not knowing the actual rule set. It is not a creative thing to put together one of these systems. The creativity is in the actual artistry, in the look dev, in the actual dreams of the people, not the engineers. And so we need to get to a point where we can start competing on creativity versus just whose system doesn't blow up. Like it's.
You know, and it's funny, we make these anecdotes and we kind of laugh, but when you're plugging these things together and behind, it's, you know, you need a roadmap. You know, you need this little map that says, okay, this is where these things go, this is why this is important, this is how we achieve that desired result of quality. And also, when we consider what that means for our teams, you know, you got to give people enough time to learn this stuff before you start billing, you know, for the space in which you're doing your production. So that education process is something that has to start so early on in not only the vision and the idea, but also in the schools, in the systems, and how we all as professionals are supporting that education. So it's time to give everybody a chance to, you know, join this initiative. And when I say that, it literally is about how we find people to come to this business, because there isn't enough of us to do what needs to be done right now.
Hello. I wanted to echo the same thing we're saying about the importance of education. You know, just in my sort of weird experience, being able to have access to this technology is really important for the education process. I know when I was sort of starting into the media server world, you know, being able to touch a hypnotizer was like, oh wow, there's something besides lighting out there. You know, friendship ended with lighting design. Now media design is my favorite thing. But being able to figure out how to take, you know, something as complicated and expensive as this sort of technology and distill it to a place where students and others are able to get into a space and play with it and break it, like that's how not only they learn what this technology can do, but it's also how the people building the systems and, you know, creating these workflows learn what could be better, what could be different. You know, it's a way to foster ideas on both sides, not just, it's not like we're going to take this rigorous workflow and we're going to teach these students how to do it and they're going to produce the same thing. No, it's a learning process for everyone, and it's very important to us to figure out how we can, you know, get new talent in, foster their interest and excitement, and then, you know, plant that seed and figure out what comes from it.
Talk too much last time? How many people here have ever been in a virtual volume like this before and shot something? How many do we have? Can we see a show of hands? It's that team and this team. No. So, I should ask that question, not Jen. I know. Well, no. That was a good question too. When we consider, you know, what happens to light and how these big lights are being used on sets, when we start to look at the final picture, you know, we actually should be looking at the picture as the camera is capturing it, not how it looks over here. And this is something that I think is a very novel approach. We can emulate the camera, the wall, we can build it in the real-time engine, and then the real-time engine has to act like the physical world. And that is one of the biggest computational challenges that exist. When I'm playing a game on my phone, when I'm playing something on my television set, my PS5 or my, you know, immersive VR headset, it doesn't look the same as what the camera looks like. So up until this time, we haven't been very cognizant of what the standards are and the regulations are. And we are really quickly moving into this world of open source standards, of refinement, where we know what works and how it works together. And that's a really interesting time. And input and community is really what's going to drive that initiative. So we're going to have more and more talk about this, and it's going to become more, let's say, predictable about the outcomes.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges we've had is color and working with, we do all the previs and we send it out. We work with the client, send it to the client, and then they get to set and they look at the LED wall and go, this looks nothing like what you shipped us. There's a lot of education in reminding people to don't look at the LED wall, look through this calibrated monitor that is through the lens. Your laptop isn't representing, your laptop looks completely different than my screen, which looks completely different than your screen. That zoom feed that you're looking at through, it's not accurate enough. And just, it's an education on teaching people, but also trying to find those workflows where we can, on our Unreal monitors as we're developing, we're seeing as close to what we think the camera's going to see as it's fed through an LED wall, which is a whole extra step of complication. It's not just what the camera sees, but it's what the camera sees that the LED wall has produced that Unreal has made, and those workflows they're complicated. And where do we put the calibration? How do we calibrate it? What are the steps to take such that what we ship to the client is going to look like what it looks like through camera, and what are our artists working on? I have go back to the team a lot and go, avoid really low light situations, avoid primary colors. They don't represent well on an LED, but how do we give them a tool such that they see that on their monitor, their LCD monitor that represents color much differently than the LED wall?
I would add that to the last question, what's really changed over the last 2 years is adoption. So I think the adoption side, because of everyone seeing this as an opportunity, LED walls have been used in concert venues for experiences for years, from Jungle Book and Lion King and Blade Runner. The use of visualization tools with real-time engines has been around for a while as well. But all of a sudden, everyone's come together and adopting all these technologies at the same time. So not only do we need to educate ourselves on the color pipeline and the data flow pipeline, but I think we need to educate the producers in terms of the time and the process and the prep and the cost, because I don't want to see virtual production be like 3D or just a fad that happens in time because of COVID. I think we can understand, we can push the boundaries and creativity, but if people look at the cost and they don't think about the time to pre-light a stage or to come in and get prepped properly, then things could go the wrong way and somebody could have a bad experience and they're done with virtual production. So I think education has to happen on all fronts, and NAB, SMPTE, the VES, ASC, everyone's out trying to educate themselves, and I would definitely do your research and look into it, but think about it and think about the time. There's more planning needed because your post-production cycle isn't really shortened, it's just moved forward in time, right? So it's that 40 weeks of post is now 20, 30 weeks of pre-pro, and then you think, oh, it's only 10 weeks left in post. No, you probably still have the same amount of time because you didn't prep properly. So I think the education process, the value add of virtual production can really push the boundaries. Somebody's going to make a move that blows our minds, right? It's going to come out and it's all around virtual production, but we're not there yet. And I think we're still trying to make stories and movies like we did, 10 years ago. And I think we need to think about how we can push the boundaries with this creativity and really use these real-time engines, use the display capability and all the additional lighting to really enhance the experience, and then think about how that all comes together for the user experience.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very inspiring thoughts. Like in the past 2 years, or whenever zero day is in the technological evolution of virtual production, we've gone very far, and we have repeatability and reliability to a certain extent, but I think we can all agree on we're not done yet. We're far from done. We don't even have a definition of done. So if we think about that, then what the future may hold in terms of creative needs and technological evolution, what do you consider being the most exciting thing that that you see is happening right now in the research phase, or technology that doesn't exist yet that you see will have to be available for VP to become really, really viable?
I'll just jump in on that. So it's really hard to say in cinema change things. When Ang Lee shot Gemini Man at 120 frames per second, people said, "Oh, that's not cinema," even though it was in a cinema and it was up on a wall, and it broke what people had for 100 years known as cinema. So I think where I see the most exciting thing is maybe not in cinema, maybe not in the way we always have looked at things, but in live events and where that's going and those experiences. When we start to incorporate, maybe making a movie inside of a game might be a whole different way of how we see movies. And so I'm really excited about that combination of live event experience combined with storytelling and where that all goes.
I'm really excited that it's starting to feel like we might be able to get like a little sloppy with it, because right now it's like walking this very narrow tight rope of you have to do these 60 things properly in order to have an effortless shoot, and you do like 40 of them, and then you sit in the back and you hit the button over and over and pray that it works this time, and that's just no fun. And we're getting past that point where we can actually have that additional creativity on set, where you can make mistakes, where it leads to inventive and new things that you never thought possible, where you can really push the boundaries. I don't know, during COVID I used to like watching like the DJ sets on Twitch. That's really creative. I love that. Like, that's virtual production. I want to do that, but on a big LED wall. But right now, because everything has to be so structured, we just don't have that opportunity. But what we're seeing is the tools are getting so much better and stable, and the calibration layer is getting more and more obfuscated from the actual operators, so that you can have a predictable result without knowing every single bit of what's going on, because the manufacturers and vendors are getting so much better, and because they had to. We've had to move very quickly. So now we're getting to the point where I can sit back and relax and just watch the thing versus have like a low level of panic at all times.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that. I think the most interesting part to me is sort of the way we're kind of, the multiple industries are all kind of stealing and borrowing technology from each other and creating these interesting things. I mean, we've got these display tiles that were made for signage, and I don't think when they were designed that virtual production was even like the concept for what they could be used for, at least in the beginning. But we took that technology and sort of brought it into film and cinema, and then we took the camera tracking technology from elsewhere and we kind of merged that in. So I think what I'm really interested in is, as we look towards the future, how can we take all of these things we've learned from virtual production, the various pieces of that, and how can we fold it back into live production to create something, a more exciting experience, maybe a retail experience, maybe like you were saying, a DJ set. Like, how can we take these things, use it in a way that we didn't intend to use it here, but use it differently there? What are they going to learn? What are we going to learn in live events from that? How are we going to take that back into virtual production? We create this cycle where we're creating some technology, we're really refining it, then we're finding the edges, we're breaking it, and then from there we're developing new technology, and then it gets to the point where it can be used in something else. We're really able to push the boundaries of what all this stuff is used for.
We have been kind of romanticizing a lot of the aspects we've been talking about. The different technologies, as they've existed on their own for decades, have yet to be collaboratively, realized to work together. We are looking at this process. Unity is an expanding company in this industry. I think because it really does look at the community and where the importance is for innovation in the community. And I keep coming back to that, we're gravitating towards knowledge that might be 10, 20 years old. Unity purchased a company called Weta Digital, and that technology and the people that are at Weta are so brilliantly organized to fix things in and during production. Now, there's the pre-production, the production, and the post, as it is traditionally. But the virtual production methodologies that are coming out of these companies used to be the secret sauce. You know, they used to be this stew that everyone would know what it smelled like when they got there. Nowadays, the concept is really democratizing, and what we hope to do is share this with everyone in a way where the cloud becomes a level of that accessibility we were talking about before. So I think it's how all these different disparate technologies and uses are now coming together to create this workflow that is going to give the access to any size production and any means of making that work, whether it be this DJ set live with a chroma key and reactive sound, to full lighting setups that, you know, are scripted down to the very X mark where you have to hit that point in order for the illusion to come alive.
I think I'm most excited for the thing that we don't know what it is. Like the piece that someone stumbles across accidentally, you know, walks in, you know, and goes, well, what if we tried this? Or like, what if we use this piece of technology? You know, the thing we don't know, which is, I think, sort of what this was a few years ago. We didn't know this was going to become the next big thing, and it became a necessity. It became a tool that we all needed. It, you know, it was people coming in from other industries and saying, well, hey, we do this here. And what that's going to be as someone else comes in, you know, I watch, like, explaining to our Unreal artists how DMX work and watching their brains go off and go, oh, all the things we can do now. And just, you know, the person who comes in from that other industry and says, well, what about this? And I think that's what I'm always most excited about is stealing those tools from other industries, stealing that knowledge base that has nothing, you know, you go, why would we hire someone who from, you know, healthcare to come do virtual production? Well, maybe they have an insight, you know, it's kind of the first thing I could pick off my brain, but someone who has nothing to do with our industry and bringing them in to solve a problem that we may or may not know we have and coming up with that next really interesting solution.
It is kind of like a Promethean concept, you know, like we're taking this fire and we're handing it around and we're, you know, breaking the rules. But man, is it ever wild when it works? You know, it's just...
It's pretty wild when it doesn't work too.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Find me after this panel, I'll tell you all the things that don't work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you all have any horror stories to share, anonymized if necessary, then please do so. No?
But it's real time.
Yeah. Speaking of real time, I mean, we've worked with real-time content systems for 5 years or 10 years or something, some of us even longer than so. And the development of real-time content engines, like Unity, for example, has been massively accelerated in the past 2 years, obviously. We're now able to render almost photorealistic environments at a 60 FPS frame rate, which is mind-blowing when you think about it, right? Looking back 5 to 10 years, rendering a frame at 4K would take hours, if not days, and now we do it in 16 milliseconds. That doesn't come without certain challenges. How can we overcome those challenges in terms of scalability of rendering, etc., and apply those techniques outside of virtual production?
Money.
We just need them to make better hardware, right? That's obviously the solution.
Would Disguise have some kind of a thing that we could use for that?
I'm sure we would.
In reality, it's actually accepting the scalability of these platforms, right? You can work on an LED wall this size, you can work on one much smaller, and then you can move it to one 5 times the size for your actual shoot. All of this stuff is actually very, very transferable. And then looking forward to, speaking of outside disciplines, Medca, right? I'm talking, I don't know if you guys have spoken to them, they're here at NAB. Looking at like how data centers are constructed, right? Looking at edge compute, because we do have latency issues and we are moving into this world of these massive data pipelines. Everything is just data. Everything is just data. Everything is just data. And working that in is how we actually start to improve how we use these tools, because we have to be able to transfer something from this to our actual shoot, because we cannot just live on these massively expensive volumes, and we can unlock the geography as well, where you can keep on producing all across the globe and just never stop because it's just ones and zeros.
Yeah. I think, Ron, you mentioned cloud technologies just 30 seconds ago. And obviously, a lot of the technology that we're using today, it lives on-prem because it has to live on-prem, right? There's no such thing as a cloud-based LED screen. But what impact do you think cloud technologies will have in the future? And what are the current bottlenecks that are stopping us from adopting more cloud technologies?
When we compare what something costs, we look at to reiterate exactly what you said, the data, the truth is in the data. And the more we shoot, the more we understand how to use the different storage mechanisms, the gateways through to different means of that data being expressible. And whether it's to the camera, from the camera to the wall, or in this post-process. During the shoot of The Lion King, we had people directing and creating in VR. That was amazing to watch directors and cinematographer and dolly pushers interface the way that they physically could with a real camera. Yet they were working with virtual cameras. And it was that accessibility to that data and how that data looked after the fact. That was the part that I really admired, was how MPC and Magnopus created a structure for which they could store all of this data and play it back again. And I think this concept of iteration and being able to do things more than once, maybe exposing some of these happy accidents in the creative that are going to give you a better story or a better outcome. Where that is and how quickly it is accessible is what something like the cloud is going to afford us. Because you have a finite amount of storage. You have, when you work on-prem, and being able to rent machines, and that's always a process. But it's the management of that that becomes a little harrowing and a little intimidating when you start to think of how that impacts your cost. It might seem like a small amount, but when you hit the ceiling of your data storage in the middle of a production, it could mean, a lot of wasted money and time standing around trying to figure out what to do next.
I think to take that and like a slight tangent off that, but still very related, is it's building these libraries of assets. Finding, when we talk about trying to run these scenes at 60 frames, a lot of that's just having optimized environments and optimized assets. And you go to the libraries that are there now, and you either have a Megascan that just tanks your performance, or you have a video game asset that looks like a video game asset. And the time it takes to get the hybrid between the two, it's a lot of manpower. And as everyone's producing, if we come up with these libraries that we can share, whether it's just open sharing or there's some rental costs, whatever, you can take that, that kitchen that's been built and optimized to run at 60, change the tile, change the color, change the textures, but you're not spending 3 months just trying to build that environment. You've got it already.
And that is really important, because working with game assets might get you 80% into your story. And then you'll take those assets throughout the production and be working them, up-resing them. It becomes the prototype of your story. And those lower resolution or proxy models, easily accessible, very inexpensive, represent an element or an asset in your workflow. And then if it works, that's when you spend the time and the money to increase the polygon count, the texture resolution, the surfacing, and the other aspects which you can do from an artistic standpoint.
I just want to tell a funny story because we are trying to figure out optimization workflows and just how you work and optimize for real time, especially the artist. I actually got a scene once where it was a living room set, and the artist was trying to dress the set, and instead of deleting the assets, he was actually hiding them underneath the couch. But like that stuff actually does happen, and it really is just a collective experience that needs to kind of happen.
On the cloud front, I would say that The cloud doesn't really add any value initially unless you plan to use it properly. And right now, I feel like with post in transition, production teams in transition, one thing the cloud can bring for virtual production is maybe that center point of project management and archive. We're still early days of virtual production, but things like reshoots and going back on a production and calling up a virtual set and having it match the same scene, and you realize, my game engine version changed. Now I can't import this scene, or I do. It looks different. What was that one checkbox that we forgot about? So having the cloud as a tool, or having companies that put together intelligent cloud platforms that allow you to build up a project, control your assets, keep, the high-res assets and the real-time assets and everything in a certain location that you can then come back to later, I think will be very important, both for episodic television, for visual effects in general, but also just general projects, live events. You go to concerts, you repeat them over and over in different cities. So the cloud can be that portable repository, that version control system. It can be your asset library. It may not be your fastest playback system, to a set, but certainly is a repository that I could copy files local and play back. So the cloud is not an answer unless you use it and plan for it, just like you would a post partner or anything else. But certainly the companies that put together that workflow associated with the virtual production workflow will provide value. So that's
Awesome.
all I'll have to say.
And sort of another way to look at the cloud, maybe a contrarian point of view, is maybe to look at the cloud as another industry from which we can beg, borrow, and steal technology. I think a lot of the architecture of our systems are going to look more and more like the data centers that are being built for the cloud now. I know the Disguise render stream system is based on NVIDIA's RiverMax technology, which is based on SMPTE 2110, which is in a way designed to be native to the cloud to allow video production to happen for a lot of what Amazon's doing in the cloud. And if we look at some of the hardware and software that's coming out, increasingly crazy networking standards, bigger graphics cards that don't even have HDMI ports on them, and they're being used for cloud-first things. As that gets developed, we can look at the technologies and cherry pick the bits and bobs from them that are really useful, whether it's storage or networking or fabrics or any of that technology can help us on-prem. We just need to build our data center or our systems, our racks, our whatever, to look a little bit more like a data center and a little bit less like maybe a backstage theater production or something.
The
Yeah.
last thing I'm going to add before we get off the cloud is that it affords us a scalability and an accessibility that we've never had before. So this concept of doing a pre-compute or being able to compile something for the cloud, being able to do very complex and massive calculations in short periods of time. And again, it's about the economics of production. How fast do I need it? What am I trying to solve for? How quickly can I get a response to my problem or my challenge? And then how accessible is that to me with my budget?
Thank you. Just for everybody, I think we all would like this conversation to go on for forever. But it is noon right now, so if you do have a lunch meeting, you're late. But I think we have some time for questions. So if there are any questions from the people in the audience, I'd love to hear them.
Ask me about my metaverse strategy.
I'm not a technologist. I'm the end user. I'm a DPO from India. Like we in India like lots of slow motion shots, extreme slow motion shots, and the camera resolutions are increasing like 4K, 6K, 8K, and all. So in what way are virtual production sets equipped to handle these kind of things, and what is the limitation that we have in today's if you have to shoot today, what is the highest resolution I can shoot, and what is the maximum frame rate we can go up to?
So I believe this one was 6K, right?
I mean, I think some of the answer to that is is like, what is your compute power? As we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
you know, to increase resolution and frame rate, you need more power to be able to deliver that. When you get to frame rate, you hit limitations in the display technology as well. A lot of walls can do 120, some can do 240, but if you want to do 240, you need a powerful back end to be able to render the frames that quickly. And not a lot has really been tested at those rates either.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of testing. We've talked about doing slow motion shoots, and you have to develop for a really optimized scene, have the compute power, and do a lot of testing. A lot of testing is necessary.
Yeah, I just like to add, I think this is a very use case driven industry, and we only make progress when someone comes up with a really crazy idea that hasn't been done before. That's when there is a lot of money involved as well, of course. That's when manufacturers will start pushing these boundaries and inventing higher frame rate workflows, etc.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about resolution is that it's all dependent on your LED product, right? Your end LED density is going to actually dictate that. You can shoot 8K on like a 1.5 millimeter, and as long as it's out of focus, it's still going to look fine. But in regards to the HFR stuff, shooting at like 120 is definitely very possible, 240. But I would really recommend looking at like a plate-based workflow, because when you're looking at especially nodal synchronization, there just are issues. Real synchronization issues when you go kind of that fast. But the plate-based workflows, they can theoretically hit those higher frame rates. You do have to do a little bit more like previs and stuff like that, because you won't have that same wide open parallax and stuff like that. But it's very doable.
One more question.
Hi. Specifically with regards to, say, film production or creative TV production, what is some of the bleeding edge, the most crazy things that people are trying to do that they're not yet quite there, but that you see is coming on the horizon pretty soon, whether it's styles or technology?
When you talk about crazy, is it crazy because you?
Well, I guess it's like
there really is a push to find out, and we joke about breaking things, about what is that departure point where you leave the confines of your safety net. When you're aiming for something and you don't quite get there, but you love what you've created. And I think a lot of the smaller productions, and I say smaller and shorter, are really innovating in how we're working with the equipment. So when I see someone go like a cowboy camera, they go wild with an LED wall, like it starts to really stretch what is possible or what the off-axis skew of the camera is. And there's an effect that happens with those kinds of work. And I think with short format music videos, pop promos, other things, there's a lot of latitude there for experimentation. And I like that rapid feedback, and it doesn't have the budget of a film. It doesn't have the outcome of a post-process that demands, 2,000 people working on the shot. It does become a more rapid, iterative process. If you haven't done something on an LED wall before, find yourself a sizable show or project that allows you that little bit of latitude and risk. And just go do it. You'll learn so much more than listening to a YouTube video.
I think those are excellent words to close out on. Just do it. The technology is there. It's up for grabs, and it's nothing to be afraid of anymore.
Moderately afraid.
Moderately afraid. Okay. I think we're 10 minutes overdue. So just like to say thank you to our panelists who joined me here today, and thank you so much for everybody out there for joining us, and hope to see you around on the trade show floor.